Good evening. I'd like to call the Planning Commission meeting to order. Today's Monday, July 10th, 2023. Iris, will you please call the roll?
Stewart.
Here.
Shannon. Mitchell.
Here.
Rigby is excused. Najak. Moreno.
Here.
Twing.
Here.
And Councillor Ali Afghan.
Here.
Thank you. Before we go forward in the agenda, I'd like to announce that we have 3 new commissioners on the panel with us starting today. And what I would like to do is have each of them introduce themselves and say just a brief something about themselves. And so I'm going to start with, on my left, with Rachel.
There we go. Thank you, everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Rachel Najak, and I moved here 2 years ago to be with my now husband. We got married last summer, and I work in affordable housing development with Hacienda Community Development.
I'm Jim Twing. I've been living here in Lake Oswego for about 30 years. Currently, I am the legal counsel to Lake Bible Church, which is located over on Carmen Drive. And also, in addition to that, I am the mission director of the church, which takes me away from Lake Oswego on a number of occasions just outside the country.
Hello, my name is Dave Scanoni. I've been in Lake Oswego for 8 years. Prior to that, I was in Beaverton for 24 years, moving up from the Bay Area to work for Nike. So I spent 24 years at Nike as their head of design. So my background is design. I had still my own consulting office. And the reason I'm here is really because of your mayor. And we had a couple questions, and he responded so quickly, and we started a relationship. And it was like, I want to be part of this. So that's why I'm here. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this.
Great, thank you all, and we're glad to have you. So moving on in the agenda, the next thing we have is we have the duty of electing the chair and vice chair for this fiscal year 2023-24. So I am open to taking nominations. Everyone jump at once.
And I'd like to nominate Mr. Philip Stewart to be chair.
Is there a second?
I second. Second.
Okay. And like how, well, let's call vote then. Let's say everybody in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any oppose?
No.
Okay. Then I will be chair for this year, and I would like to now take a nomination for vice chair. I would like to nominate Commissioner Moreno. You can either accept or decline. I should say that. But it's a nice position.
I appreciate that. I'll accept.
Do I have a second? All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, and that is settled. Thank you. All right. So moving on, moving on to our city council update. We have Councilor Afghan here.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations to you and the Vice Chair. A warm welcome to the 3 new commissioners. Thank you very much for volunteering, and congratulations on your new appointment. And thanks to the existing commissioners for staying on board and carrying the torch forward. Update from City Council, Urban and Community Forestry Plan update cycle has begun. We're looking for public comments and public participants. I may come back to this group and ask for volunteers to be part of that input to the urban and community forestry plan. E-bikes have been, the usage have been increased through most of the cities and towns, including ours. And there are some rules and regulations we have, with the help of course, the police department and the city workers, decided to up the communication and education before we go into enforcement. For your information, any bike that is an e-bike got to be less than 1,000 watts output and go less than 20 miles per hour without any assistance. Otherwise, it's considered a moped. And you have to be 16 years old and older and have approved lighting, and definitely not allowed on sidewalks. And you have to use bike lanes when bike lanes are available. So the city, including the police department, is going to up the communication and the education regarding what the requirements are. And I don't know if you heard a person was killed in Bend area, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen and prevent that from happening in Lake Oswego. Next item is, I think most of you may know that we do have a new fire engine, and we had decided to donate our old fire engine to Ukraine, which has been received by Lake Oswego residents. They have welcomed it, and on 4th of July, so many people had the opportunity to ride on the fire engine before it's shipped. Rasik Park development, first phase has been approved and is going forward, and it basically includes the public utilities, improvement on the right-of-ways, and the public restroom. And the skate park will be under a different contract. We wanted to make sure that we have the opportunity to move the project forward. July is Disability Pride Month, so there are a lot of activities happening around that, and I'm sure you either saw or participated on the 4th of July activities with the parade and music concert, and of course, environmentally friendly laser light show at the Foothills Park. August 1st is the National Night Out, and we're hoping that people get to see their neighbors and have engagement with their neighborhoods. And as most of you may know, outdoor and summer events in Lake Oswego have begun, and they're in full force. And music concerts, farmers market, movies in the park, etc., etc. Those are the highlights I wanted to share with you. Are there any questions, comments, concerns for me?
Commissioners, any questions for Councilor Afghan? I think we're all good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I will stay silent and listen to some of the conversations you will have, if that's okay.
Yep, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to public comment for issues not on tonight's agenda. Do we have any, Iris? Thank you. Next on the agenda is Commission for Citizen Involvement. I have an advertisement I'd like to share this evening. The Lake Forest Neighborhood Association is having a free barbecue dinner and annual election board meeting on Saturday, July 22nd. 5:30 p.m. is the social hour and dinner, and board meeting at 6:30 p.m. Saturday, July 22nd, and that is at the West Waluga Park Shelter. And if there's any questions, you can contact by email the Lake Forest Neighborhood Association, LAKEFORESTNEIGHBORHOODASSN@gmail.com, or contact Kate Myers at 503-753-2577. Are there any other citizen involvement announcements from the commission? Seeing none, we'll move on to the minutes. And we've got a set of minutes to review from June 12th, 2023. Do I have a motion to approve or comments?
Make a motion to approve the minutes for June 12th.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay,
Mr.
motion
Chair,
is-
before you call for the vote, since we do have 3 new commissioners, procedurally, we need to have a majority of the commission approve the minutes. And that would be 4 with 6 of you there. Minutes are an administrative approval, or like a legislative matter, anybody can vote on them. So even though you may not have been at the meeting or you may not have reviewed the minutes, you may approve minutes even though you weren't there, if you find perhaps by your other commissioners indicating that the minutes were accurate or truly reflect the meeting, that would be sufficient then for you to cast your vote in favor.
Right.
Or denial. But
And we
you'd
only
be-
need
you'd be-
one.
Pardon me?
And we only need one.
Yes, you need at least one from the 3 new commissioners.
All right. I'll have Iris call the roll on the vote, if you would.
Stewart,
Yes.
Ganone,
Yes.
Mitchell,
Yes.
Jock,
Yes.
Moreno,
Yes.
Twing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. Okay, moving on to the business part of our agenda. So we have the Metro Regional Transportation and TriMet Planning Updates and Presentation. Public comment is accepted for this item. The commission will receive a presentation on recent efforts to update the Regional Transportation Plan from Will Farley of the Engineering Department and Molly Cooney-Mesker, Senior Community Engagement Specialist at Metro. Welcome.
There we go. Evening, Commissioners. My name is Will Farley. I'm the city's traffic engineer. I have some involvement with Metro in the update of the RTP. I've asked Molly here to come help update the commission on Metro's goal for the RTP and the overall process, kind of a high-level overview of what they're doing, and then I can go into of how we were involved in this update and what we're doing. I noticed that on the agenda is also a TriMet part, which I didn't catch. I have a little bit of information for TriMet Transit if that goes that direction, but I've catered this presentation mostly on the Metro and the Regional Transportation Plan update. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Molly.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for having me. As Will said, this is sort of a high-level introduction to the Regional Transportation Plan. I'm happy to answer questions. If I can't answer them, I'm happy to bring them back to my colleagues and get those answers for you. So the Regional Transportation Plan, what is it? It's really a blueprint blueprint that guides investments for all forms of travel in the region. So that is driving, transit, biking, and walking, and the movement of goods and services throughout Greater Portland. So that includes the urbanized areas of Multnomah County, Washington County, and Clackamas County. It is a federally required document. Every urbanized region in the United States, over 50,000 people, has to have one. And for a transportation project to be eligible for federal funding, it needs to be included in the region's RTP, Regional Transportation Plan. It's updated every 5 years, and we're updating it right now. Actually, today the public comment period opens, and I'll have a little bit more information for that at the end. And it must be approved by the end of 2023 by the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation and Metro Council in order to keep federal funds flowing into the region. So that's the deadline we're working towards. The Regional Transportation Plan is really guided by a vision and goals. It serves, one of its main purposes is to serve as a coordination tool to move the region together in a coordinated way towards these shared goals and vision. So that vision includes what you see on the screen here, which is that everyone in the region will have safe, reliable, affordable, efficient, and climate-friendly travel options that allow people to drive less, support equitable, resilient, healthy, and economically vibrant communities and regions. So it's an ambitious goal, and that goal is supported through that vision supported through 5 goals, including equitable transportation, mobility options, thriving economy, a safe system, and climate action and resilience. And these goals really reflect the input from members of the public over the last several years, decision makers, business leaders, and they're improved by the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation and Metro in 2022. So they've really been driving the work over the last year plus. The RTP is really, uses that vision statement and those goals through this outcomes-based approach to create performance targets to describe the outcomes the region wants to achieve and indicators to measure our progress on those outcomes. The vision goals also guide policies that then guide decisions and action throughout the region. They guide a financial plan that identifies how the region will pay for investments, and an investment strategy that includes major local, regional, and state transportation investment priorities. So those are sort of the main components of the Regional Transportation Plan, sort of high-level policy framework that includes the vision and the goals, policy in pursuit of those vision goals, financial plan, which is really key to meeting the federal requirements around the plan, where we document how the region is going to pay for the various transportation investments that it's planning for over the next 22 years. In this case, we're planning out to 2045. And then the priority investments that the region wants to be making now until 2045. So the policy component of the Regional Transportation Plan, again, I mentioned that we update it every 5 years. So with each of those updates, there are some new policies, there are some refined policies, there are also policies that were just updated, let's say in this case in 2018, so we're carried forward. In this update, there are new policies related to pricing, mobility, and transit. And updates to some other key policies, some minor updates, and then no changes to safety, bike, pedestrian, and emerging technology policies that were just updated in 2018. So the Regional Transportation Plan is really built off of some key frameworks, and one of those is the 2040 growth concept. So that's the concept that directs where and how we build and grow in our region, and the Regional Transportation Plan really lies on top of that. Transportation network maps identify regional networks for driving, biking, freight, and pedestrians throughout the region. Equity focus areas identify where there are higher concentrations of people of color, people with low incomes, and people with limited English proficiency in the region. One of the key maps is a high injury corridor and intersection map. So this identifies where there's high rates of serious injuries and fatalities from crashes. And that is a kind of is a key map in helping for transportation agencies to identify where their priorities are to help address those needs and issues related to safety. I also mentioned that this is an investment plan. So this 2023 Regional Transportation Plan includes more than $68 billion in investments planned in the region by 2045. You'll see that a majority of those investments are actually just to maintain the system that we already have. So we see $43 billion in operations maintenance spending. So that includes transit service and operations, transit maintenance, and maintaining the throughways, roads, and bridges in the region. The other portion of that, $25.5 billion, is on new projects. That's about making new connections in our transit system, our walking, biking systems, roads and bridges. You'll see that, the largest project, or there's one project that has its own category. It's considered a mega project, which is the I-5 IBR Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. It's the only project that kind of reaches the threshold of mega project in this regional transportation plan, so it stands alone. The spending does represent 771 projects that are expected to happen between now and 2045. There are a variety, you'll see, of these capital spending projects. When we look at those kind of new construction projects, you'll see that it's across, again, this kind of wide range of investments, including freight access, which is really about getting to and from ports, getting goods in and out of the region. Information technology is a small portion of the budget, but that's a very efficient way to manage the system. So we're looking at curb ramps, we're looking at smart signals, those sort of things. Those are the investments that you see there. So here you see the projects on the map. This is an online map. I encourage you to all go look at it, and just kind of zoom into the areas you're interested in. Here in Lake Oswego, the areas you travel throughout the region, and see what investments are planned. It includes, again, a list. The RTP includes a list of the next 22 years of planned investments. This map represents those investments. And the goals and vision that I touched on briefly really guided the transportation agencies in the region to identify their priority projects that they submitted to the RTP. So all of these projects that you see here were submitted by the transportation agencies in the region. So that includes the City of Lake Oswego, it includes ODOT, it includes TriMet, SMART down in Wilsonville. The counties all come together through this regional transportation planning process to coordinate the transportation projects that they're identifying as priorities for the next 22 years. So again, these projects are really either federally significant projects or projects that transportation agencies want to make eligible for federal funding, and that's what comes into the RTP. And those projects need to come from public plans. So often they're coming from transportation system plans or a concept plan, transit service plans, in the case of SMART and TriMet, comprehensive plans. So they had the projects that come into the RTP, when cities submit, they have to verify that they've been through a public process that included opportunities for public engagement. The next steps on this 2023 RTP are, again, I mentioned we're in a public comment period, so that launched today. It's a 45-day public comment period that runs through August 25th. After that, the public comments will be considered for amendments to the plan and refinements to the plan. And the advisory groups will discuss that public comment through the fall into November. Starting in November, we'll have a refined draft final plan for the Joint Policy Committee on Transportation, JPAC, and Metro Council to consider for adoption, again, by the end of 2023. So right now we're in public comment. I encourage all of you to go check out the plan and share with others. There's an online survey. There's an online comment form if you have really specific kind of line edit type of recommendations for the plan. We also encourage comments via email, phone, and there's a couple of opportunities for testimony to Metro Council. that very high-level overview. I can answer any questions, or do you want to? No?
Might as well go and take some questions if there are any on the Metro piece of the presentation.
I think we have any at the moment. Thank you for your presentation.
Right, let's see if it goes. Yeah, did you get my presentation to load up? Uh-oh. There it is. No, no, that's the EV charging policy. Oh.
While we're waiting, can I ask a question about Metro?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I know that that Lake Oswego is part of the Metro service area. What is the rest of the service area?
Yep, so it is the urbanized areas of Clackamas County, so it was only actually about 50% of Clackamas County that is included in the metro boundary. And that it includes most of Multnomah County, if not all of it, and most of Washington County. So there is Metro's transportation planning has a slightly different boundary than the urban growth boundary. Because Metro is the metropolitan planning organization for the region, again, that federally designated function of coordinating transportation planning in the region. We follow the MPA boundary of the region, so it's a little bit different than the urban growth boundary, if you ever see a map, but it's very similar. So again, yeah, really just those are the urbanized areas of the three-county region.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Should be coming through here in a minute. What's a meeting without a little bit of fun technical difficulties? All right, here we go. So I'm going to try to limit the use of acronyms. I love my acronyms as an engineer. So I wanted to give kind of the Lake Oswego's perspective of the update to the regional transportation plan. I wanted Metro to come in and kind of give you the high level of here's what this plan is doing. Now I'll kind of go into our piece of the process. To kind of give a background, I'm going to give kind of a high-level list of the city's plans. So we have our comprehensive plan. This is going to be the best reading material for the Planning Commission, and is an amazing read, keep you up at night, riveting, gives you information on zoning. It's the goals, the policies, and action measures of the comprehensive plan are intended to guide the community in making decisions. The plan is intended for use for all that participate in the city's land use planning process, including local officials, persons with development interests, state, regional, and federal agencies, neighborhood and community groups, and citizens representing all interests. I took that from the plan. You'll probably read it in the first few pages when you go into it yourself. The most recent update that we've done to the comprehensive plan was in 2014, and it took about 3 years to update the document and adopt it. I gotta be hitting the right button. Comprehensive plan. The Transportation System Plan, this is where I'm involved. This is where the Planning Commission, the Transportation Advisory Board, and myself can intersect in coming up with the projects in this one. We previously updated it in 2014. The purpose of this plan was to identify and facilitate implementation of an integrated multimodal transportation system that will meet the needs of the city residents, businesses, and visitors for the next 20 years. The Transportation System Plan considers regional and statewide transportation goals and policies, such as those identified in Metro's Regional Transportation Plan, and their impact on Lake Oswego. This is generally updated every 10 years and can be a living document and receive amendments. In our last iteration, we identified nearly 200 projects, and that was through extensive public outreach with neighborhood associations, kind of figuring out what their priorities were and compiling them into this document. The projects range from anywhere from small pathway projects, which some are currently being built, to new traffic signals or even new bridges. So next, kind of giving a plug to the next document in the line is the Capital Improvement Plan. This one was just updated as part of the new budget biennium. It is a 6-year planning tool that identifies infrastructure and major equipment investments that are necessary to provide city services. The projects in the Transportation System Plan can be considered when determining what has funding and is a priority in the next 6 years. In this most recent iteration, we have 175 transportation projects identified, of which 10 are funded, and most of those are upcoming pathway projects that were prioritized by the Transportation Advisory Board. If you'd like more information on a capital improvement plan, I have the Assistant City Engineer coming to present to the Transportation Advisory Board on July 20th, and you're welcome to tune in, and I think we'll even have some public comments and questions on that. So on to the Metro Regional Transportation Plan and how this all fits in. As Molly has explained, this incorporates projects from jurisdictions throughout the Metro region. The projects submitted need to come from adopted plans, such as our Transportation System Plan or our Capital Improvement Plan, that involve a public process and have incorporated a public comment process. Projects need to be listed in the Regional Transportation Plan to qualify for federal funding, such as grants. If we wanted to go for a grant, we need to have our project listed in the RTP. So going back to the 2018 Metro RTP, I was not involved in this, and this is my first process with the RTP, but we included 17 projects in the Regional Transportation Plan for that year. They had approximately $131 million in total costs for all the projects. This included about $14 million in projects expected to be constructed in the near term, about $38 million in the long term, and $79 million within what's called a strategic list. This is an aspirational, if we stumbled across a bag of money and we could spend it on anything we wanted, we would want them to be in the strategic list. The other ones would reasonably be expected to be funded in the next horizon of the plan. So in that case, it was the 2040 horizon. Projects in that plan, projects we submitted ranged between $2.3 million and $19 million. And to list out the projects here, I kind of broke them out. The projects in black were in the financially constrained list, so it's the complicated way of stating that we'd likely expect to have funding available to construct them. Not that they would be constructed, but we may have funding. We also have other priorities that aren't included in the RTP that we would expect to fund in ourselves. So again, we put the projects in the document to be eligible for federal funding in case we want to go for a grant. Red projects in this were identified as strategic projects. So we just didn't have funding identified for those. Now that you have the background, we moved forward 14 projects of those 17 into this iteration. Construction costs have gone up in the last 5 years, so we're now at $162 million, with about $32 million expected for near-term projects, $68 million for long-range projects, and $63 million within the strategic list. These projects, of course, have gone up. They range between $3.2 million and $26.6 million, so quite a big jump for some of them. And this colorful page kind of gives you an idea of how we reshuffled some of the priorities. So the projects in the near term that are marked with an asterisk were identified by the Transportation Advisory Board as being a priority pathway project. I wanted to bring those to the near term just because there is an interest in building these sooner rather than later. The Lakeview Boulevard improvements is a project that I've applied for federal funding on multiple occasions. Haven't got it yet, but I have hopes that we can probably get something in the near term for that one. The projects highlighted in green have been moved from the strategic list or things that we did not have funding identified for to possibly being able to be funded in the long range. Complicated. I'm barely grasping some of it, so bear with me. Molly can help me answer some of the questions as well. But with that, we can go to questions.
What are the ones in the red?
The reds are still strategic. We don't have funding identified for them.
I had just a tactical question. It's great to see bike lanes being added, and as an avid cyclist, that's great. But what I find all the time is a beautiful bike lane and then it's full of debris. So is there some protocol where it's cleaned on a regular basis so that you're not forced almost into traffic because a big chunk is not necessarily rideable?
We try to keep up with the maintenance on the bike lanes. We have a street sweeper program that goes through most of the areas with bike lanes. As they get dirty and we get reports of them being obstructed, we can have our crews go out and sweep them up.
Yeah, just call Will for those inquiries. Yeah,
Yep.
He's the point of contact, I'm pretty sure.
I can get them to the right person.
Any other questions? I don't have my, just speak up if you do have questions. I don't have my monitor thing turned on. That being said, I think that no more questions. Thanks very much for your presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and next on our agenda is the electric vehicle charging policy presentation and update. And so also public comment will be accepted at this presentation. We have Amanda Watson here, Sustainable Program Manager. Welcome.
Good evening. Commissioners, as your chair said, my name is Amanda Watson. I'm the city's Sustainability Program Manager, and I coordinate the implementation of the city's Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, so our citywide sustainability and climate goals. Eric asked me to come and present about EV charging policy in the city. I'm going to take kind of a broad view, talk about our goals, and then talk about a current project we're focusing on to look at EV charging infrastructure particularly. So the city's Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, which was adopted in 2020, includes several different goals related to electric vehicles, in particular increasing adoption of electric vehicles across our community as one out of a few different strategies to reduce transportation emissions overall. It's really electric vehicles were identified in the plan development as a really key strategy for Lake Oswego to reduce our transportation emissions, given the fact that we are, we don't have really great transit connections right now in the community due to low density and a number of other reasons. And so we really needed to focus on electric vehicles, at least in the initial stages. So A couple of the goals are up here on the screen. They relate to transitioning the city's vehicle fleet to electric vehicles, and doing so through a electric vehicle purchasing policy, or rather a fleet purchasing policy that prioritizes electric vehicles, what we call an EV first strategy. We also have a complementary goal to install charging stations to support fleet electrification at a majority of city facilities. Other goals include encouraging adoption or installation of EV charging technology across the community through partnering with developers, large landowners, partnering with PGE, our local electric utility, and then partnering with community groups to really do more education and outreach to increase adoption of EV infrastructure. And some key community partners here are the city's Sustainability Advisory Board and the Lake Oswego Sustainability Network community group that has an annual EV fair, has had this for the past several years. I don't remember quite how many years now, but it's a very popular event, and they get a lot of great information out into the community through that. So just a little bit of progress on kind of where are we now with these different EV goals. Right now we have 8 electric vehicles and 12 hybrids in the city fleet. It's a great start, but we are a fleet of about 170 vehicles, and so the city is working on developing this EV first purchasing policy. Public Works is leading that, and I'm working with them, and so that will really help accelerate that fleet transition. We also recently applied for a grant from PGE for an electric bookmobile for the library, so we're all crossing our fingers that that will come through as a really exciting project, and we're hoping we'll get the funding for that. We already have 11 charging stations here at the city installed in city facilities, 7 of which are available for public use as well. So there are a number of dedicated chargers, including in the police garage for city fleet vehicles, but a lot of them are dual use, so available for the public and also for city vehicles. Those are currently at the maintenance center here at City Hall on A Avenue and on A Avenue, so just right in front of the Shell station, actually down the street from here. We'll be installing charging stations in new city facilities, so some notable projects being the new Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center, the LORAC project. We'll have 5 charging stations installed, an additional 15 spots that are wired for electric vehicle charging stations to be installed in the future. And the new wastewater treatment plant project is also planning to have charging infrastructure as part of that project, so we're kind of planning ahead as we're working on new capital projects. And as I mentioned previously, we're collaborating with community groups on EV education and outreach. And we also are working with the Chamber of Commerce to share information about available incentives that are out there for businesses in particular to both purchase electric vehicles for their fleet, but also install charging stations. There's some great both local, state, and federal incentives out right now for that. So just, sorry, this is a little bit washed out, but just a quick snapshot of where do we have public charging stations in Lake Oswego currently. We currently have 31 publicly available charging stations, so more than we have gas stations, which is a fun fact. 17 of those are in the Maryswood complex, which is awesome for them, but we certainly have areas of the city that don't have as many charging stations, as you can see here. Most of these, so this is from the PlugShare website, which is sort of a crowdsourced. Most of these are publicly available for anyone. Some of them are located in multifamily communities, and so they may not be particularly convenient or able to be found by residents easily, but they are out there. These are all level 2 charging, so sort of that intermediate charging level. You can get from 0 to 80% charged in between 4 and 10 hours is usually it's a wide range, but the stat. But there is one bank of fast charging stations, so that same amount of charge in about half an hour, give or take, at the Bank of America, right nearby City Hall. As I mentioned, we have a couple of city-owned charging stations that are available for public use at A Avenue, City Hall, and the Maintenance Center. These are our Maintenance Center chargers. We have, I know there's been some public interest in the parking policies and charging, so I wanted to just kind of outline that here for what it looks like to charge at the City haul stations. So for all of these stations, it's 9 cents per kilowatt hour to charge. And that is set at basically, well, it's at the break even with our cost of electricity. So we're not making any money on it. We're just recouping the cost of the electricity that folks use. And then we have a parking policy that's intended to encourage folks to charge only as much as they need to and move along when they're done charging so that other people can use the spot. So the way it's structured right now is the parking is free for the first 2 hours. After 2 hours, folks are charged 75 cents an hour for additional hours that they're charging in that spot. And finally, this is a standard policy, but parking in the EV charging spots at city facilities is only allowed when vehicles are actively charging. So you can't kind of sit in the spot when you're done charging or be in the spot if you're not an electric vehicle driver. So sorry, this is quite small, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the broader context, right? So the city has our EV charging goals, but we're operating under state policies and federal policies that are also really looking at increasing adoption of electric vehicles. And actually, the state has put out a number of plans recently looking at projecting EV adoption across the state and working towards a 2035 goal of having all new vehicles be electric, to say how much infrastructure will we need to support those vehicles on the road. They also recently put together a plan called the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan, which details how they will be spending $52 million in federal funding that the state will be getting to install charging infrastructures along alternative fuel corridors, essentially major highways in the state, to support kind of long-range EV travel. We have a number of regulations in Oregon that support electric vehicle charging infrastructures and electric vehicle adoption through that charging infrastructure, including a right to charge law, saying that folks who live in condos or who are renters have a right to install charging infrastructure for their own use where they have a dedicated parking space or in a shared parking space with the approval of their condo association or their landlord in either case. So it's sort of a right that you have to pay for the charger, but you may install a charging station to allow so that you can charge your electric vehicle. We also have EV-ready building codes, and this is probably a project that has come and will come before the Planning Commission, but the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules do require new multifamily residential buildings and mixed-use buildings that have 5 or more residential units to have conduit that's sufficient to serve EV charging stations for at least 40% of parking spaces. So that used to be 20%, it's now 40% for those buildings in particular, and Eric can correct me if I'm misspeaking here at all, but and state building code also requires 20% of parking spaces in commercial buildings, building garages or parking areas to be wired. So we've got a pretty good baseline of what's required, and we're looking at what additional do we need to do in terms of encouraging and installing charging infrastructure to continue to make that available for folks that want to drive electric vehicles. What else? I mentioned earlier, there's a number of financial incentives. So there's grant programs, there's tax credits and rebates that really support both folks to purchase electric vehicles and to install charging infrastructure. The last one, the federal charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary grant program, the city of Lake Oswego actually joined with a number of other cities in our region to submit a joint proposal or application led by the city of Tualatin. And so that's, it's been submitted. We'll find out in some time whether or not we get it, but that would be a great opportunity for a number of cities to install more public charging infrastructure. So the current project that we're looking at, so how do we increase EV adoption across Lake Oswego, really focused on charging infrastructure. We figured we have a lot of these electric vehicle related goals in our sustainability and climate action plan, and a number of different strategies in the way, but we identified a need to articulate a strategy specifically around charging that looked at, how much charging do we need in our community? What do we have now, and where are the gaps? So what barriers exist for residents, businesses, developers to either access or install charging infrastructure. And then where's public charging most needed? In particular, the majority of charging takes place at home, followed by at work. This is kind of what research tells us. And publicly available chargings, like the charging stations we have on A Avenue, are the least used, but they do have a critical role in addressing a kind of a number of things. One is just what we call range anxiety. So concern that a current or prospective electric vehicle driver might not be able to get where they need to go because they'll run out of charging. So this range anxiety is ameliorated when folks see charging opportunities around the community, right? There's visible places to go and charge. Public charging also provides a safety net for drivers on longer trips, right? If you're far from home or far from work where you usually charge. And then finally, public charging plays a really critical role for members of the community that can't charge at home or at work. And most often that ends up being people who live in multifamily communities who can't charge at home. It can be for a number of reasons, but often it's the parking situation. So, it may be a shared parking garage or parking lot, which makes it difficult for folks to install chargers. It gets complicated to finance things like this when it's not an individual person with an individual parking space that they can install a charger in. So the citywide EV charging strategy, we're looking at how much charging infrastructure do we need and what are the gaps and barriers that we need to address. We're looking to outline the role of the city, but also other partners, recognizing that the city is not going to be in a position to install, own, and operate charging infrastructure, all of the charging infrastructure that's needed across our community, and we can play an important role. But we also want to see what can we do to support businesses and developers and residents to install the charging infrastructure that's needed too. And then also want to understand through the survey kind of what criteria do we need to use to select sites when we are looking at public charging. So, is it near multifamily and affordable housing or near high populations of renters? Are there amenities nearby? Is it in a safe, accessible, visible area, et cetera? So identifying what are the needs, what are the different roles, how can the city facilitate the most effective and equitable solutions, and then kind of getting a plan for when we do have the funding, where do we need to install charging infrastructures. And this charging strategy will be informed by a community survey, which we're going to be looking to have out in hopefully late summer and the fall, as well as community outreach and engagement, again, with some of those partners I mentioned earlier, the city's Sustainability Advisory Board and the Lake Oswego Sustainability Network in particular. So I think that's all I have for you. Again, it's a sort of a broad overview of the topic, but if folks have particular areas of EV charging policy that you're interested in hearing more about, I'm happy to also answer questions.
Thanks, Amanda. And just really quick, I just wanted to mention that we did receive some public comment now from a former planning commissioner, of course, but now he's a member of the public. But, I think just want to make sure you were all aware that that was sent out and that we did receive some comment from Rob Heap on this. I think Amanda did a good job of kind of explaining some of the answers to his questions related particularly to the sort of work that we're doing to require EV conduits essentially for new parking spaces in multifamily development in particular, as well as Rob's comment, Mr. Heap's comment included some suggestions when it comes to pricing for the charging. So those are things that we've sent over to Amanda and will be considered as EV charging policy is more broadly and holistically considered in the future. So just wanted to point out that that was something that is sort of on the public record here.
Go ahead.
Amanda, thanks so much for the presentation. It was great. You mentioned a funding or source of funding. I guess that's my question. What is the source of funding that we're going to get this from?
So currently right now, city charging stations are out of the city's budget. And so for example, if it's a capital project, like the new capital projects we're looking at, we're building that into the project budget, or the city's maintenance department is installing the charging infrastructure as new vehicles are purchased. If we need another charger, they're planning it. So that's just out of the city's general fund right now. We don't have a a special source of it. We certainly are looking at kind of any and all grant opportunities that are out there, recognizing that, as we scale up, we're going to need more resources for it. And like I said, we have this competitive grant application in with the City of Tualatin and others, so fingers crossed we'll get some more funding through that in the PGE grant. So we're kind of piecing things together. As you can probably imagine, this is expensive, it's expensive to install, and then there is operations and maintenance costs through the life cycle of the equipment. So it's something we are having to plan for, yeah.
Thanks.
Councilor Afghan, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question and also a request. The question is, did I hear correctly that any new multifamily projects will have to have at minimum a conduit for future EV charging?
That's correct, yes. 40% of spaces will have to be wired for charging.
Okay, thank you for that. And the request is, I know that there is a fast charger coming online at New Season in Hallinan area. I know there's a fast charger in First Edition. My request to the sustainability team is, how can we enable a fast charging station at the Lake Grove area?
Thank you. Good question.
That's a request.
and
You
yes.
don't have to answer that. That's just a question to the sustainability team.
Great, I will certainly pass that along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I do want to build a little bit on the topic of multifamily housing and the requirement that the state has for 40% conduit future installation. Have you looked into also having a requirement component where a developer would have to install a certain number of actual stations? I know in a lot of jurisdictions that I work in, if there's like a 10 or a 20% future installation requirement, i.e. conduit, there's also like a 5% where you actually install stations, because there is getting to be more and more demand for charging stations at especially these larger kind of multifamily developments. And if only the conduit is installed, I mean, there's no guarantee that that actual charging stations will be purchased. And it's becoming more and more the norm that there's also a requirement for the stations themselves, obviously at a much smaller percentage. So I would encourage you to look at that for the city as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's a great question. The Sustainability Advisory Board hasn't looked into that in particular. I don't know, Eric, if that's something that we might be talking about later on, like through the CFEC process, but not as of yet.
Yeah, I think when it comes to CFEC, the simple truth is that there is one option, and we are complying with that one option, which is the 40%, of the spaces to be served by conduit. That there's no specific mention of the number of stations that need to be constructed to a company, or a proportion, or some type of ratio of spaces to stations or something. So I think there's certainly an opportunity for us to look at that. I think it would probably be something that it would be great to put through the electric vehicle charging policy sort of larger plan discussions, and see what folks think. And I think there's a lot of things that could supplement that 40% requirement.
And obviously that's not something that the city has to pay for. That's placed on the burden of the applicant or the developer. And I would also look at that for hotels as well, because a lot of people, a lot of people that stay in hotels, obviously they rent cars. Sometimes they rent electric cars, or they will more so in the future. And I would look at hotels in a very similar sort of lens.
Absolutely, yeah. I think more and more charging is seen as an amenity, right, for hotels and developments. But yeah, certainly something we can look into. The city of Portland, I know, also just recently passed an EV-ready code that goes above and beyond the climate-friendly, equitable communities, so we can learn from what they've done as well. I don't know off the top of my head if it required the stations or was just a higher
Yeah,
percentage
and
of
there's a number
condos.
of, there's a number of jurisdictions in Southwest Washington that require the stations as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking about not passing the full burden on to developers or operators of multifamily, but see if there's an incentive system we could put in place that will get them to do it as well and share in the costs. I don't know what the appetite is of that. Obviously, I don't control the
Yeah,
purse strings.
that's
but-
obviously a better option, but it's becoming sort of assumed that, you know, it's just privately funded, you know, so, I mean, that's a nice perk, but I think it's getting more and more common that that's just
PGE
private.
does have a good program right now for business charging, and they just modified it, so it used to be around $2,000 per port for a charging station that was installed, but they're now covering some of the make-ready costs, so some of the infrastructure side that tends to be more expensive anyway. So I think that could be a complement for something like this, you know, that is not from the city, but another partner that could help offset some of the costs.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of opportunities for us to weigh in, at least now, you know, just generally knowing that there is this effort that's going to be coming into place. But also, you know, might be a good idea to invite Amanda back in 6 months to a year or whatever it might be to check in on how things are going and provide input once we see a little bit more where that plan is headed.
Sure, and I'd love to share when we have the survey ready. I'll share it with Eric, and if you want to share it with the commission, and if you help spread it through your networks, we'd love to get as broad a reach for this as possible, both folks that have EVs and people that don't. But we want to hear from them as well to understand how the plan can support everyone.
Got a lot of general info for you today, but a lot of opportunities to provide input as well. So it's hopefully a nice introduction for the new commissioners into the larger sort of planning efforts that are kind of tangential to what we typically see here at the commission.
All right, any other questions? If not, I think we'll wrap up on this. Thanks a lot for your for the information.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, now we are on to schedule review.
All right, I'll give you all a rundown of the schedule. So our next meeting will be on July 24th. We are going to talk more about the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules, primarily related to parking, but there is, of course, an electric vehicle conduit component that we'll be discussing a bit as well. So I'll be giving an update on that. We'll have a lot more on that in the coming year or year and a half or so. We're going to be tasked with complying with the state rules related to parking for climate-friendly and equitable communities, or the unfortunate acronym is CFEC. So I'll try to avoid using that, but it's a mouthful to say the whole thing. So coming up at our next meeting in early August, we'll be discussing just another update, but on the vertical housing tax credit program. It's something that that City Council has directed us to look into as a pilot project for the North Anchor development. So just wanted to provide you all with an update on what that looks like and what type of financing mechanism is being utilized there. As well as later in the month, we will be having the first hearing with the new commissioners, so our big public hearing on the housing needs analysis update, something that we've been working on here at the city since fall of last year at least, and that's part of a multi-year effort related to the housing needs analysis and housing production strategies. So really a fairly big milestone there on the 28th with our first public hearing here at the Planning Commission. I would also mention that we don't have a date scheduled yet, but there is potentially a new neighborhood association that will be forming here in the city, which is exciting. So that's something that we will be working with those folks to coordinate, and we'll be coming to the Planning Commission in the coming months. So a little bit to look forward to on that, but it looks like folks over in the Marys Woods, Merrillhurst area portion of town are looking to organize and create a neighborhood association. So we're hoping to support them as much as possible. So yeah, that's just an entree. A lot more to come this fall.
All right, thank you, Eric. And I think that's it for our agenda, so we are adjourned.